Hey all of you, hope you guys are great. So in the last video we have completed the entire smart contract and we have also deployed the contract to the Polygon test network. So if you haven't watched the video, make sure to watch it. That will make you more sense. So we have covered two most important part in our project. We have built the entire API, we have built the entire contract, and now we have to build the context. After completing the context, we move to the UI part. So hope you guys are excited and you guys are learning something amazing in this project. If do so, then hit like and subscribe and do let me know that you guys are enjoying this project. So here I have opened the project and we have done all of this thing, all the code we have written. Now let me close this one, and we have done with this entire one. Now come back to the context and we have to work on the context. So let's start writing on it. So let's start working on our context file. We have to import couple of things. So we need to import the use state, use effect, and use context and create context, and that's coming from React. Then we have to import the XCS because we have to make API requests to our database, and we can so we can upload the NFTs in our database. Then we have to get all this function from the third web. So we'll need this use address hook. We need this use contract, use MetaMask, and then we have some new hooks as well. So we use this use disconnect, we'll use this use signer, and that's coming from the third web, React. Then we have to import the ether package. Then we have to come here, we have to build the state context, and that's coming from createContext. Once we have the context, now we have to simply export the entire model we have designing. So we'll say export const. We have to build the context provider. In that we have to pass the children, and inside that we have to write all the logic, all the functionality for our application, and whatever we go to export from this, it will be available in our entire application. So this is the pattern we have followed a lot in our previous project, and that's what I'm doing here. So first thing I have to do is I have to get the contract, and that's coming from use contract. In that we have to pass the address. So this is the default address I'm typing, and let's come here. Then we have the address because we have this hook, and all we have to do is to call this hook to get the address of the user. Now we have to call this connect, and we'll call this use MetaMask. If you are using any other wallet like wallet connect or any other coin, you can simply use their hook and you can connect that as well. So we have the address, we have the MetaMask. Then we have to create the front end function. So we'll call this const disconnect, because we'll have a button to disconnect from our MetaMask, and not MetaMask, with the application. Then we have the signer, this coming from signer. Then we have the get balance, because once we'll fetch the balance of the user, we have to store into a state variable, and that what we're going to pass it to display in the front end. So we'll say use balance, use state balance, and it's coming from balance. By default it's empty. Then we'll take this loading state. Initially it will be false. Then we'll take the const fetch data, and this function will run every time user will reload the browser. So there are certain function we have to call to make a request, and this will allow us to fetch the user address and the balance of his wallet. So we'll call fetch data async, and in that we have to call this try and catch block. We'll say use balance, we'll pass the const balance, and we have to say await signer if we have signer. Because sometime what will happen that if the user is not connected, if you go with the simple logic, so what will happen, it will throw an error when this function will roll over, because we are not checking for the signer. If the signer is not exist, but the function will call this particular method and it will throw an error. So we have to add a condition on that. So we'll say get balance if the signer exists, and we have to simply take that balance and we have to check. So we'll say that if address exists, then we have to pass this balance to the ether package, and we have to convert it into a readable format in ether, else we have to we don't want to call this function. So that's the simple logic we have built. Then we have to simply set the balance to the state. Then we have to simply close our try and catch, and we have to simply throw the error message if anything goes wrong in that. So this is the fetch data function we have, and now we have to call this function. We'll say use effect, and we'll call it straight away whenever this application reloads, empty array. So that's the very first function we have in our context, which allows us to fetch the information of the user, including the balance, and which based on the condition. Now come here, we have to write the function for contract. So first function will create to upload. So we'll say upload image. It's going to be an async. In that we have to receive the data, so we'll say image info, and this image info will come in form of object. So here we have to simply deconstruct the object. So we'll have the title, description, email, category, image, and here we are coming from this image info. So we have all of the data. Once we have the data, we have to take this try and catch, because we have to catch the error if anything goes wrong. So we'll say catch chairs. So first we have to take the amount. So in our contract we have a function called listing pricing, and we have to get that particular listing pricing which we want to charge from the user. So let's get the price. So we'll say listing pricing await contract call, and this is the second method we are calling, contract call, and we have to pass the name of the function we have in the contract which we want to call. So we'll say listing price. So this will give us the price of the listing. Then we have to simply say const create NFT, and we have to simply pass all of the data. So we'll pass the upload function name. So this is the function we want to call, and in that we have to pass all the data. So we have to pass the address, image, title, description, email, category. So make sure to pass the exact order which you have defined in the smart contract. If the order is mismatched, it will throw an error. So you have to provide the exact order which you have defined in the contract. That is absolutely mandatory. So we are passing all of the data in our contract function, and then we have to pass the amount we want to charge. So we have to pass as a value, and we'll pass as a listing price, and we have to convert that into a string. So it will charge the amount successfully when they will list the NFT to the marketplace. Looks pretty good. Come here. Now we have to simply come down here. So that's the very first function we have. Once the function is get successfully listed in our smart contract and we are getting success, now we have to store this data in our API. So we'll make an API request. We'll say API call. We'll call this const response, and we'll call this await. We'll use the XCS, and here we have to provide the method. So first method is going to be the post request, because we have to upload the data to the API. So method is going to be a post. Then we'll have this URL, and this is the endpoint we have built for creating API. So and here we have to set the data, all the data we have to pass, and whatever data you will pass here, it will go in the body and it will assign in the API. So we have to pass the title, we have to pass the description, we have to pass the category, and we have to pass the image, we have to pass the address, and we have to pass the email. So these are the information we are passing. We don't need to keep too many information. That's the exact information we are passing, whatever we have defined in the model. So that's the data we are passing, and then we have to come here and we have to simply console log out the response. So once this function will execute successfully, we'll get a response back, and that's what we are consoling log out here. And we can also console log out the response from the contract we are getting. Contract call successfully, and that's what we have here. So let's set the loading state to false, because someone will click on upload, it will load, display the loader, and at the end we have to display to set to false. And then we have to simply reload the browser to start the application and fetch the information. Let's close this catch block, and we have to display the error message if anything goes wrong. Looks pretty fine. So that's the second function we have in the contract, which allow us to upload the NFT in the contract as well as in the API. Now let's come here. We have to call get contract data. So we'll say upload images. So this will allow us to get all the data we have uploaded in the contract. So it will say async. We have to call the all image. So we'll say images await contract.call, and we have to call this function get all images. That's the contract function we have in the contract, and we don't need to pass any argument in it. Then we have to come here. We have to get the total upload, that how many users have uploaded, and that's very easy. We can call this get. This will give us the total number of NFTs created in the marketplace. Then we have to get the listing price. So we'll say listing price await contract call listing price, and this will give us the data. Now we have to format all the data. So we'll say all images, and we have all the images here in the images variable, and we have to simply loop over it to format the data, because the data will be unformatted, and we have to arrange the data in proper order so we can render in our component and will not have any issue. map. And here we have to define, we have to get the data in form of object. So we'll say honor, it's there in the image.creator. Then we'll get the title. Here we have the title. Then we have to get the description, image description. Then we have to get the email, and here we have the email. Then we have to get the category. Then we have to get the fund raised, and we have to raise the image, and we have to get the ID of the image. We have to convert into a number. Then we have to take the created at, the timestamp, we have to convert into a number. And then we have to get the listing amount, and we have to convert into a ether, pass it and convert it to a string, because this will come in form of big number and we have to convert it into a ether. Then we have to take this upload and we have to convert it to a number, because this will also come in form of big number. And that's the data we are returning. And let's call return all images, and that's the only thing you have to do here. So whenever you will call this function, it will return all the NFTs uploaded to the smart contract, and that's what we are fetching here. Now we can get single. So this time we are working on the single data. So we'll say const single image async. In that we have to pass our ID, because every single image will have a unique ID, and on the base of that we have to fetch it. So we'll take this try and catch block. We have to call the function we have in the contract. We'll say await call, contract call, and get image. We have to pass the ID. So in the data we'll have all the data about the image. So we'll take an object image, and we have to format the data, because the data will come in the form of index value, and I don't want to access the data in form of index value, so we have to rearrange the data. So we'll take this title. We'll have the title in data 1. Then we'll have the description will be in data 1. So the title will be data 0, description data 1, email in data 2. Then we'll have the category in data 3. And the reason you're thinking that why I'm coming up with this, because I have already built the project and I know that where I have the variable. Then we have the fundraise in this particular data 4, and we have to convert it into a ether. Then we have to take the cat creator. Then we have to take the image URL. Then you have to take the created at. We have to convert that. Then we have to take the image ID, and we have to simply close that one. So these are the data we are formatting and getting in form of object. So we have to return this one, return image, and that's the only thing we have to do. Now we have to close the catch block, console log out the error, and that's the entire data it will receive in this function. Come here. Now we have to work on the donate function. We'll say donate fund async, amount and ID. We need these two data. Then we need the try and catch block, because we have to catch the error. Then we have to call the function. So first let's check the data we have in the function or not. Once we have the data, that's what we're going to pass in our contract. So we'll call this donate function, and we have to pass the ID, and the amount we would pass as a form of value. So we'll take this amount dot true string. So that's the function we are passing the data, and we have to console log out the transaction log, and we have to reload the browser. So that's the only thing. Now we have to simply work on the catch block. So that's the only function you have to write for the donate function. These are the only thing you have to do. So we are done with this. Now come back here. Now get data from the API. So you can call the endpoint API endpoint right up here in the NFT context, or you can call it individual in the component, but it's better to call it here. So we'll say const get all NFT API, and in that all we have to do is to make a request to the endpoint we have built. So we'll take this get request. We have to pass the URL. It's going to give us the response, and we can simply take the response. In that response we have all the data. So let me comment this one, because we'll test later. Now come back to the single NFT. In that we have to pass couple of data. So we have to pass the ID, because that's how we have to filter the NFTs. And the same thing we have to do here. We have to simply build the response and make a request to the endpoint. So we'll say get, this is the URL we're going to pass, and we're going to pass the ID, and it's going to respond, give us the response. and that's what we are simply logging out. So that's the API request we are making here. Now we have to simply return all of the function we have built here. So let's return one by one. So we have to return the context provider because we have to wrap the entire application in the context, so it will be available in the component. So we'll say state context provider, it will be the value, and inside the value we have to pass all the data. So we have to pass the contract function we have. So we have to pass the address of the user, then we have to pass the entire contract, then we have to pass the connect function, then we have to pass the disconnect function, then we have to pass the user balance, then we have to pass the set loading and the loading states, then we have to pass the function we have created for interacting with the contract. So let's pass the upload image, then we have the get uploaded image, then we have the donate function, and then we have the single image, and we have API calls as well. So let's make it get all NFT API and get single NFT API. So these are the data we are passing. Simply close this one, and here we have to pass the children, and then we have to close our context provider. So that's the entire thing you have to do. Now come here, we have to export this context. We'll say use context, and we have to export that context. So that's the entire piece of code we have written. So that's the entire piece of code we have written for our context management. Every single thing is fine. You can see we have written so many code. We are importing all of the things. Everything is working fine. So this is the import, this is the Axios, this is the third wave import. Close this one. This is the ether, this is the context we have, the contract, and let's come back here. So what I will do, I'll come back here in the IPFS. So I'll give the demo one. So I'll simply copy this one, the actual contract we have deployed in the last video, and that's what I'm going to simply replace here, paste here, and that's the contract. Make sure to do the exact one. And we have the contract address. Now we have this hooks. So if I come back here, I have explained everything in this particular video. Okay, in this project I have explained everything about third web and their hooks. So make sure to come if you want to know extensively about the hook. So make sure to follow that one. Come back in VS, and where we have all of the hooks we have generated, and this is the fetch data function we have, which will run whenever a browser will reload, and it will give us the data. Close this one, and this is the first function for upload image. We are getting the data, then we are passing the function into the function with the value we want to charge. Then we are making a call to our API and updating all of the data in our database. So simply come up here, and here we are getting the response and logging, and then we are simply setting the loading state and reloading. Close this one. This is the get uploaded image. So this will allow us to get all the images we have uploaded. Looks pretty fine. Formatting all of the data. This looks pretty good. That's the basic thing. Close this one. This is the single. We have to pass the ID, then we are filtering the data based on the ID, and then we are formatting the data in a form of proper object so we can render that one. So okay, looks pretty good. Let's bring this back, and index 1, index 2, everything's looking fine, and that looks good. Close this one. Then come back to the donate fund. We are taking the amount from the user, calling the function, passing the ID, and then we are passing the amount to donate. So that's also working fine. This is the donate function, and this is the two function we have built for the API for getting the data from the database. That's a pretty simple. Let me uncomment this. Looks good. That's good. And this is the get single one, passing an ID, and it will give us the single one. And at the end we are passing all of the function. We are building the context provider and passing all of the function and the method we have built for balance. This is the general, this is the function one, and this is the API functions. Hope you guys are at the same place where I am right now, and you guys have understood every single thing we have covered so far. Looks pretty good to me. Now come back here, go back to the, simply come here and go back to the pages, and here we have to do the configuration. So let me remove all the code here in the app.js and let's write it together. So first thing, we have to import the CSS file, which is coming from the global CSS style folder. Then we have to import the chain ID and the third web provider, and that's coming from the third web React. Then we have to import the state context provider, the context we have built, and that's coming from the context NFTs. Now we have to simply export default functions app, and in that we have to pass the component and the props. So this is the general convention you have to follow in React or Next.js. Then we have to simply return. Now we have to wrap the third provider, and in that we have to make it to active chain to be the chain ID to be Mumbai. Then we have to take the context provider, and in that we have to simply pass our component with the props. Then close our context provider, then close our third web provider, and that's the only setup you have to do. And that's the entire setup you have to do here in the app.js. Looks pretty good. That's amazing. So we are done with this entire context setups, context provider. Everything is looking good to me. So we are importing this one. We have the third web, then we have the context, and we are configure that one. Now close this, come here, close this one, close this one, close this one, close this one, and here we are. Let's come back to the package.json file. Things are looking pretty good to me. So it's going to run our backend, and if you run this one, it's going to run our front end. So what I will do is, now let's run our front end and backend together. So what we have to do is simply type npm run dev, and this will run only front end. You can see our front end is running on localhost 3000, and here you can see that we have this blank canvas and we have this index. Everything's working fine. If I reload the one, if I do the inspect element, you can see we'll have an issue. And if I come back to the console, if I come here, we have no issues right now, and looks pretty fine to me. So our front end is working absolutely fine. So that's the only thing I want to cover in this video about the context management. Hope everything's making sense to all of you guys. Now from the next video, we're going to start working on the UI part. So we have done with the most three important part of our project: building a backend, working on a smart contract, and building the context. All we have to do is to build the front end and attach all the function we have included. So that's what we do in the next video. Let's move to that.